Everyone, welcome to our Zip Chat today. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike Watson, who is our host today.
All right. Hey, everyone.
There we go.
Zip Chat, episode 4, AI and data after COVID-19. My name is Mike Watson. I'm the VP of Engineering at CynerZip. And for those of you who are not familiar with our Zip Chat format, it's kind of a casual fireside chat style conversation. With me today, I have Steve Meyer. He's the Chief Creative Officer and co-founder at Kung Fu AI. Hey, Steve, welcome.
Hey, howdy.
So let's jump into the topic. So my background in AI is not very strong, although when I did originally go to my college for computer science, I was interested in AI and I actually picked an AI program. And then my professor, the professor of AI at that school, actually left and the program left with it. So I ended up doing something very similar to social media before it was a thing, which is also very interesting. So anyway, I've always been interested in AI, but I don't really know a lot about it other than, what I've picked up through learning. So I'm very interested also in learning from you, Steve. What I do know about AI is it's pretty prevalent, especially in some of the biggest companies like Amazon, Google, Facebook. I mean, they're powered by AI. That's how they do their recommendations and, do a lot of the things that make them a lot of money. So it's certainly something that's scary and, profitable for us. With that, I want to introduce a quick poll, find out where everyone is in their AI journey. So we can bring that poll up. And while people are taking that poll, why don't I pull Steve into the conversation? Tell me a little about Kung Fu AI and what brought you into the AI field.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I'm one of the co-founders and chief creative officer for Kung Fu AI, and we're just purely artificial intelligence services. So we're a consultancy that makes things, as I like to say, and we're working with clients across the gamut, from helping them build a roadmap and find their strategy to help them build custom solutions in areas like natural language processing, computer vision, and predictive statistical modeling. I, as a co-founder, got into it because I was actually leading a strategy team for a boutique digital agency here in Austin, Texas. And we worked with Fortune 500 tech clients, and one of them being IBM. I had the opportunity very early, when IBM Watson was just being released to the market, find a way to actually leverage it as an internal tool for our IBM clients. So I got to learn the technology by getting very hands-on and just fell in love with it. I've always been a tech geek, but always been on the creative side of technology, thinking and looking for emerging tech and trying to figure out, okay, this is fun and interesting from a tech geek perspective, but how is it practical and how is it applicable to actually solving real world problems? So I've always really focused on trying to map those two things together. And once we started playing with it and using it for IBM, we started realizing its potential and started using it for other clients, as well as actually incorporating it inside of our business to enable the consultancy. So at that point in time, it was a great time to just focus on it, and was presented an opportunity to join up a team who are thinking of things the same way I was and getting started that way. And that was back in late 2017. So haven't looked back.
Awesome. That's great. So in the last Zip Chat, we talked about changing regulatory environments in telehealth and the healthcare space. These changes, being triggered by COVID-19, of course. I'm wondering if you're seeing any changes in how people are collecting data or the volume of data as related to that, because I know in AI, data collection is a huge part of it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think right now, because we are moving to a predominantly remote workforce, and we have changed our buying habits, where everything's going through some sort of digital or e-commerce channel, we are seeing tremendous changes in terms of the data being created and how data is moving around. I think that the number one thing that we've observed in market and with our clients is a renewed focus on digital transformation. So this is really accelerating things if you're coming from a more traditional industry, or if you're a traditional company where digital wasn't the bedrock on which your business was built on. Now we need to accelerate that forward to enable our remote workforce, but also find new channels ultimately to engage our customers in. So I think the two biggest changes we're seeing from the data standpoint is really on the consumer side as well as the employee side, Whereas on the consumer side, if most of our consumer behavior is being done through digital channels and digital buying behavior, that is creating a tremendous amount of what I call data exhaust, meaning we're making a data imprint, but oftentimes we kind of lose it into the ether where the business might not be sophisticated enough to collect it or know what to collect. But because we are making a lot of these transactions, and a lot of where we spend our time now is on social media and e-commerce sites and in digital formats, all of that data exists if only we could harness it. So we're seeing a tremendous amount of changes in consumer behavior, but also additional consumer data being created. And then on the flip side, on the employee side, now that we've moved into more of a remote workforce or work from home, we are enabled exclusively to do business through digital technologies. All of them create a digital footprint of how employees and employers are engaging with one another. And it's a tremendous opportunity to collect data on our work habits and our workflows to better analyze and optimize those in the long run.
Gotcha. So you mentioned that you like to solve problems there at Kung Fu AI. What problems are you seeing out there that could be solved, like in the more immediate term with this COVID crisis?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think it actually segues well into the visual y'all are seeing on the screen right now, which I put together. I'll start, there's two visualizations, or really one visualization and some additional content. So we'll start on the one you're looking at right now. This is actually a lot of good data pre-COVID, where this is McKinsey data stipulating where AI is being applied most successfully across industry, but also ranking the magnitude of impact and the level of utilization we are seeing by industry. So if you go along the y-axis, you see a list of industries that are actually prioritized, ranked on their adoption curve or adoption maturity for artificial intelligence. So not surprising, you mentioned companies like Amazon, Facebook, Google, high-tech companies, digital natives, as I like to call them, are certainly leading the way. They're born on the cloud. Digital has been everything to their business. They've been collecting data before it was cool and have a tremendous advantage to actually leverage artificial intelligence, and are using it across their business to streamline their operations. But if you go down the line, you see things like automotive and assembly, telecom, travel and transportation. If you have a keen eye, you may realize, well, gosh, COVID has completely taken some of these industries off the board, if not has disrupted them completely, where they're trying to reinvent themselves. So the order of which you're seeing here is really changing below our feet. But if you look across the x-axis and you look at the top, you see the different types of AI or machine learning being leveraged and what level they're making an impact across the business. So we're seeing tremendous opportunities in fields like robotic process automation, which actually isn't robotics. It's just the process of using any sort of machine intelligence to automate a process or part of a process, to things like computer vision or using artificial intelligence and cameras in the visual spectrum to identify behavior, understand data that exists in images, all the way through natural language processing, actual robotics, natural language generation, which will be more important things like chatbots. So this has changed a ton, but if you actually jump to the next slide, this will directly answer your question, Mike, in terms of, well, what are we doing now? Because the game has changed a bit. And some of the things, I'll give it a second to catch up, but we're seeing a tremendous amount of behavior change in which companies, how companies view artificial intelligence and where they're ultimately investing and placing their bets. So just in general across IT, some of the observations that we've observed with our clients, but also well represented in the research when you look at analysts who are doing surveys on this content, is most of IT spend has shifted to risk reduction, operational efficiencies, building competitive advantages. So for example, if you are a product company who's suffering, you may want to develop a new product. Or if you're a software company who's suffering, you may want to think about differentiated features to add to your product. And I mentioned accelerating digital transformation in the drivers there. But specifically to AI projects, what we're observing and what the research supports is that previously we saw a whole bunch of technology tourism, whereas a client would invest in artificial intelligence because it's interesting or it seems like the right thing to do, but there really isn't any strategy behind it or really expectation of application or return. They're just doing it in more of an R&D level fashion. So we're seeing less proof of concepts for the sake of proof of concepts, and we're seeing a lot of spend being cut back on the R&D side of things for some companies, whereas others are actually accelerating. But also we're trying to see we're seeing quicker wins. People want quicker return on their investment, measurable return on their investment, less moonshot projects that are doing really hard aspirational things in the field of AI in favor of things that can solve small problems that unlock a lot of business benefit. So at the end of the day, if we can apply artificial intelligence to help us reduce our cost, but keep up our productivity, or things like mitigate risk or scenario modeling, that's predominantly where the smart spend is being applied.
Gotcha. So focus on, small, easy to achieve type of objectives, and not those moonshots you said is going to be really important. Yeah. I think in general, probably a good idea, but it certainly seems with limited funds, even better idea. So let's pull up the results of our poll. I'm interested to see where people are. All right, so interesting. So we've got half not started, which I would predict, and then 38% already well down the path. That's great. Remaining pending. So Steve, does this mesh with your thoughts on where spending is going right now?
Yeah, it's certainly representative to what we're seeing. Predominantly about 65% or so of businesses and industries have actively implemented, where many more, almost up to 90%, are exploring it in some capacity. And we're starting to see fewer and fewer laggards, meaning don't know much about it, haven't really gotten started. So this isn't surprising. Actually, it's a bit of a surprising number in terms of people having multiple deployments. I think that's right now the hardest challenge in artificial intelligence. They even call it the last mile AI problem, because it's such a problem of getting your POCs actually into production. So it's good to see there's some people who have some success there.
Yeah, I mean, if that feels like the right thing. Like, it's easy to come up with an idea, but it's hard to productize it in terms of the models. Let's move on from there. So I have a second poll, which is related to the first poll. Let's bring that up. And this is about, what are your plans for the future? Because a big part of what we want to talk about today is the future. So are we increasing, decreasing, spending the same? So let the audience answer that. And as we move into the future, so I've heard of this technique called transfer learning. And my layman understanding leads me to believe this is something that could really help companies rapidly deploy new solutions. Can you talk about transfer learning? Maybe give the audience a little primer on it, and then, do you agree that this is something that could really help?
Yeah, absolutely. From a practitioner perspective, it's very unusual if you are building machine learning models from scratch. We have this tremendous advantage of a very active and engaged open source community that is actually publishing a lot of their work and making it open source for other people to build on top of. And the idea of transfer learning is this idea of you're basically taking an open source model that has been trained to operate on one task or perform in one behavior, and actually repurpose that model to perform a new task or understand a new behavior. And to give you an example, we worked on a project where we were helping automate some of the appraisal process. Whereas if you were going to send a rare coin to an auction house and get an appraised value of that rare object, it's a very manual effort to actually look at that object and understand if there's any value, and if so, what level of value. Now, as you can imagine, these appraisers spend most of their time looking at worthless artifacts and coins that are at the value of the face of the coin. So how then do we save the business some opportunity by triaging the common coins back to the individual and say, sorry, this isn't worth a whole lot, and then free up the appraiser's time to just look at the actual valuable coins. So when that client tried that project, even 6 months prior to engaging us, it was a project that led to a dead end. They spent a year investing in the effort. They were only able to get to about 75% accuracy. So now, using transfer learning, we were able to take an open source model using computer vision that was trained on identifying and classifying cats and images. we were able to strip out a few layers of that model and retrain on classifying coin data. And in 2 weeks, we were able to overachieve levels of accuracy that they were only able to touch in over a year's worth of training, to illustrate two things. One, how quickly the technology is changing, but also shows you the power of transfer learning, where that model, that very complex, deep neural net that was trained by many people over billions of data points, could easily then be repurposed on a completely different task and provide really quick value. So as a service provider, this becomes really important, or as an engineer in this space, it becomes really important to look to areas like TensorFlow and PyTorch and find open source libraries that approximately do the task you're looking to do, and see if you can retrain that model on new data to perform a new task and save you sometimes years of development. And that's pretty much the go-to for the community at this time.
All right, so this transfer learning is really important for the future then. That's great. I think we have a question from the audience. Subu, are you out there? Do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Hi, Steve. So people talk about AI and machine learning in one breath most of the times. Are there subtle differences? And I've understood AI more as building intelligent machines or intelligent systems, more like implementing rules as you move through some workflow or whatever. So I would like to hear from you how to distinguish, how they're different, and if you can give some sort of a example or whatever as to how they're different, that'd be great. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Probably top 5 questions that we get most frequently. So it just shows there's still a lot of confusion on what different sectors mean in terms of the field. But and to preface this answer, there still isn't consensus across the community of the direct distinction between AI and machine learning, and often they're used interchangeably, and that's okay. But how we use it, and generally other people subscribe to, I'll strong caveat that, is artificial intelligence. Typically what we all can agree on in the field is artificial intelligence is a general term, where machine learning and things like deep learning are subsegments underneath the umbrella term of artificial intelligence. So for us, artificial intelligence means quite literally any computerized intelligence that you can use to understand a behavior or perform a task, where AI will include things like robotics, meaning physical artificial intelligence, and all of the digital intelligence. And machine learning is really exclusive to all of the digital artificial intelligence. So doing all of these behaviors and tasks, leveraging computers in some sort of digital format. So that's typically where we're educating clients how to bifurcate the two ideas. And then everything else in terms of deep learning, reinforcement learning, and all these new emerging areas are subdomains of machine learning.
So where does natural language processing fit in?
Okay, so if we want to go down the decision tree, it would be, so we have artificial intelligence, machine learning. Underneath that, we have deep learning, and natural language processing is a subdomain or a example of deep learning.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So machine learning is just the mechanical or the computerized learning versus, like, say, physical manifestation of learning. Got it.
Yeah, but if you want to sound smart in a room and use artificial intelligence, that actually covers everything, so you can't be wrong.
Perfect. So another question for you on the future. So I know I think everyone wants there to be a crystal ball, like for this COVID crisis. When is it going to end? When can we see, certain transition points, phases changing, which can, all these kinds of things. And my understanding of AI is we can't do that. Like, it's not a crystal ball. If it were, we would predict when hurricanes were going to happen and things like that, which is another, very complex system that has a lot of variables. So my question to you is, outside of those types of things, do you have any thoughts on how we can get the economy back on track using AI? Or people safer using AI? Like, I know you're looking into the future. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, I'll throw some more terminology at you. And if I had the answer to that specific question, I probably wouldn't be here right now. However, to your point, artificial intelligence is not a crystal ball. We still have yet to achieve and may never achieve. Here's a new buzzword for you, AGI, or artificial general intelligence, meaning artificial intelligence that can perform equally well, better than a human on a multitude of tasks, none of which are really interconnected or related. Artificial intelligence is in fact ANI, or artificial narrow intelligence, meaning it solves a very tiny problem in a very specific domain on a very specific set of data. And if you try to go broader beyond that, you're really sacrificing on the accuracy of the capability, or you're starting to break into the area of hard or impossible AI. So with that being said, you have to look for low-hanging fruit, especially in this COVID climate. I mean, we have a couple of conceptual examples sitting in front of you on where AI can make a dent. I think some low-hanging fruit opportunities, if we're not talking about the specifics of how we're using AI to combat COVID, because that's another great conversation, which we can talk about. But specifically, the first thing I would do if I was in charge of a business who is trying to find value in this technology and trying to extend their digital transformation spend, in some sort of measurable return, is use data and machine learning to help you better understand what the new normal looks like for your business and for your customer. From your customer, how do we fuse external data sources about our customer to the internal data sources about our customer and start looking at the trend lines of how their consumer behavior is changing? Just because we relax restrictions on stay-at-home orders and, notwithstanding the fact that it's spreading the virus, people are going back into the wild, but they're not shopping and not behaving in the same way. People are starting to like this idea of food being delivered to us and being able to buy things online and get them shipped to us within a day and quickly be able to return them if we don't like them. That's a behavior that's likely here to stay, and being able to do more digital means and have this self-service that comes to us is probably something that's going to become more normal than abnormal in both B2B and B2C settings. So in that regard, that changes how we engage our customers. That changes the channels in which we engage our customers. So how do we take this data that's being created right now and remodel what we know about our customer to better engage that customer and serve that customer moving forward? That's a good bet to place right now, leveraging the data that's being created right now. And I think on the other side of things, most businesses are looking for new channels to sell their products, or they're looking for new products themselves. And that's going to be a big lift that artificial intelligence can play a part in, but won't solve. But ways that you can create a piece of that puzzle would be using machine learning to do better scenario modeling. So how can we better forecast our sales moving forward using some sort of machine learning mechanism versus some very linear or statistical modeling or linear regressions that we've used in the past, or just simply our finger in the air based on tribal knowledge of some of our most senior sales executives. So there's certainly ways now to use data and machine learning to get better predictions, but more importantly, use a lot more data. So leverage big data that can often break some of these linear models that we've created and that have been previously used, and also incorporate unstructured data. So data that includes voice of the customer in the form of product reviews or call center logs, or just a dialogue that we can capture or scrape from social media. All of this becomes data that can become interesting to our sales forecasting model, for example, that is unusable in a linear fashion. So I think that doing things like that provides some really low-hanging fruit opportunities, as well as identifying anomalies, mitigating risk, look for fraud, depending on what sector you're in.
Yeah, gotcha. Are there any obvious marketing opportunities? I mean, you talked about sales forecasting, but is there a way to influence like social media, or have you heard about anything like that?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Tons of areas in that domain. It's an area that I've actively been participating in most recently. So it's fresh on top of mind. I think if you are of a marketing function and you're trying to wrap your head around artificial intelligence, first of all, you're not late to the game. Your entire field is late to the game of artificial intelligence. Marketing actually lags behind the business by several years in terms of their maturity and adoption, which is kind of crazy because they're usually the innovators and the disruptors in the organization. But from a low-hanging fruit perspective, first of all, I think sales forecasting is still very important to marketing. It is very hard. One of the biggest complaints that the CEO and the CRO has of the CMO is, how much business are you actually driving? And at the beginning of the year, how can I measure your spend, your contribution, to know if it's worth the investment? still a question that most CMOs struggle with. So sales forecasting for marketing, there's an opportunity to use artificial intelligence to truly understand and model out how much you're actually contributing to sales. But beyond that, I think there's a great opportunity to use artificial intelligence to understand which lead is a quality lead, which lead is most likely to convert, so we can spend more of our time and attention from a nurturing standpoint to progress that lead across the goal line. And then there's things like personalization of the actual message. How can we better understand our customer using machine learning, then better personalize our content and automate the personalization process based on what we understand about our customer and what we can identify about them when they come on our site, personalize content, personalize incentives around that customer to have more of that white glove type of service, but also increase our conversions. So I think those are probably the two key areas I would focus on as low-hanging fruit in the marketing.
Great, thank you. We have a question from the audience. Jill, do you want to field that question for us?
Sure. This gentleman has an issue with his mic, but could you provide some insight in how AI and business intelligence with, in tools like Tableau, how do they dovetail together?
Yeah, great question. And I think that there's still a lot of confusion between the difference of analytics, business intelligence, and artificial intelligence. And there is a ascendancy model by Gartner that visualizes this very, very well. I wish I had it handy. But basically, it looks at analytics as diagnostic and descriptive, but looking backwards. How can I look at data and understand what happened and start to diagnose why the event happened? And the why it happened starts to bleed from the realm of analytics, which is kind of the Neanderthal of the data analytics spectrum. And then you start to get into the proto-human, which is the business intelligence, where you can start to diagnose why did that event happen, but you still are using a human on top of that to analyze the information and try to come up with some sort of game plan or strategy and how to orient around that data. Whereas machine learning and artificial intelligence is all about prediction. What will happen? And in the highest order of fidelity, we're talking about prescription, or what can I do about the future, or what should I do about an event that is about to come? So that's where machine learning can be different than analytics and even business intelligence to start to predict and even prescribe the action, which is really becoming the interesting area of AI. Now, how that interoperates with your Power BI dashboard or your Tableau, you're having a lot of companies that are starting to add some more predictive intelligence on top of their platform. But what we do is we'll actually build on top of Tableau or build on top of Power BI to add some sort of predictive analytic dashboard. So you can have your backwards looking metrics, but you also can have your forward leaning metrics and start to understand what behavior should I be alerted to and events should I be alerted to before they happen. And ultimately it's up to us, the human, to decide if we want to act on anything and how we want to act on any prediction. So typically we'll build on top of that, but you're going to see all these products release their own versions of this in the not too distant future, I'm sure.
Okay, great. Thanks, Steve. I got a little distracted and we got some poll results that we haven't looked at. So why don't we pull those up? Oh, look at that. Most people are increasing their investment. That's good news for the AI industry in general. And sounds like people are hearing your message, Steve.
Well, I don't know if I'm swaying anybody. I certainly will support it. However, there's smart investment. There's investment in AI and there's smart investment in AI. And just because you're increasing the investment, you're not likely to find a return on that investment. So it's very important to invest wisely.
Great. We have another question. It's Subu again with another question. Subu, do you want to ask that question?
Sure. Thank you. So my question is, another question is, how do you know model is working or not working? For example, when you develop something and do testing, you make some inferences as a result of testing. But when you go to production, that's a new different, it may be a completely different story. And you have to do things all over again. So the question is, how do you know that a model is really working? In some cases, it may be obvious. Other cases, it may not be. But how do you know that when to pull back on a model and rework on the model that is not working?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that should be established very early before you actually get to the training phase of the model. There's always and should always be a strategy phase where you really closely align to the business objective you're looking to solve before you start talking about the how you want to solve it. And if and only if artificial intelligence is appropriate to solving that problem, you want to establish what percentage of that business objective are you looking to see a return on in the near term versus the long term, but specifically down to your technical and functional requirements. What are some of the indicators of the model performance would I like to see that would help me feel like we're making progress to that goal? So there's not one right answer to that. And sometimes you're going to be optimizing for things like precision versus things like recall, meaning I want to optimize to making sure that if I'm going to identify a phenomenon, for example, let's say fraud, I want to optimize to reduce false positives versus false negatives because that scenario is more important to me in the business. And what percentage of false negatives in this scenario would be detrimental to the business? These are all things that we have to establish very early. Now, when we actually get into the production of training and building the model, it's very important that we're finding first ground truth data, meaning a representative set to train our model on that shows them the answers to the question we're looking for them to solve. So again, if we're trying to solve for fraud, we want a ground truth data that represents the bulk of the cases, but a lot of the edge cases and outliers, and basically in a supervised fashion, identify for the model, this was fraud, this was not fraud. And then the model will eventually generalize on new data. So part of the ground truth in training it is you want to have your training set, you want to have your validation set, you want to have your test set. So you're basically taking a large chunk of training data. Some of it is for training the model, and then some of it isn't supervised training. It's actually just validating the model is working well and what type of hyperparameters are pieces of the model you want to tune, and then finally validating it's ready for showtime in a production environment. If you did all that well, you shouldn't see a lot of surprises in the data coming in that would fluctuate your accuracy of the model. If anything, if you keep putting more data in it, the model generalizes and the accuracy should go up and up and up. Now, there are problems once you're in production that let's pretend you stop feeding the model new data, or if the data inherently changes, meaning something changed about your customer behavior, which is very common right now, or fraudsters have invented a new way to add fraud to the equation that we've never seen before. So you have to monitor for some of these anomalies and these outliers, and you'll start to monitor and see your model drift a little bit in accuracy. And that's a good time to send the team in and investigate what's going on. How can we get that accuracy back up? But if you have aligned on metrics in the very beginning, if you see in the very early stages that that number is achievable in the training phase, you're not going to see a lot of surprises once you get into production, unless the world or the data changes underneath your feet, which is hopefully not going to be the situation most of the time.
Gotcha, that makes sense. I want to ask the audience if there's any other questions. Give you a couple of minutes to ask their questions. If not, we'll wrap up here with Steve's. But also, I'd like to show you our contact information because if you want to follow up with either of us, you definitely have that option. Can we bring up the contact slide? So Steve, just while we're waiting for questions, I imagine, are you seeing an uptick in your business? How are things going?
Yeah, we are really seeing an uptick in our business, really across a multitude of industries. So I wasn't surprised to see a lot of people feel like now's the time to increase their investment in artificial intelligence. But yeah, we obviously very scary situation in the March-April timeframe, and we were fortunately one of those businesses that didn't have to lose anybody, but we were kind of in this contraction mode, waiting to see how things were going to shake out, like many businesses are. And now we realize that we can survive through this thing. We're actually seeing a lot of businesses move money around and saying, okay, we need to double down on data to better understand our business or our market, or we need to double down on innovation that would be unlocked through data or some sort of capability. So there isn't a tremendous amount of small boutique services companies out there. Typically your options are going to be big five consultancies or very, very large, 10,000 person artificial intelligence specialists. So, us being smaller and boutique provides some clients some good advantages. So we're starting to see the phones light up quite a bit.
That's great. All right, Steve. So is this the best way to contact you, just directly via email?
Yep.
or
Yeah, that's
other
absolutely great.
media
I'm,
outlets?
I'm happy to answer any questions related to the content here or dive deeper into any specific conversations we might have around projects.
Thanks everyone for joining. Steve, thanks for taking the time, and I look forward to seeing you on future Zip Chats. Bye everyone.